There are people who have ventured to the very edge of life itself, where death lingers in every breath and every passing second could be the last. They are not the heroes found in textbooks, nor the central figures of ancient epics. They are ordinary individuals who endured circumstances that were anything but. In today's video, we'll revisit some of the most extraordinary survival stories, stretching from the endless expanse of the open sea to the desolate reaches of frozen wastelands. Each one is a window into isolation, into raw human courage, and, at times, a quiet reminder that life, no matter how fragile, can still take root in the darkest corners. So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you just might have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. On the sunlit morning of January 30th, 2014, along a remote stretch of beach in the Marshall Islands, two local men were walking the shore when they stumbled upon a strange figure, naked, disheveled, and bearded down to his chest, staggering out of the surf. In one hand, he clutched a rusted knife. In his eyes, a vacant stare, as if he had just emerged from a forgotten dream. He spoke no English, only scattered fragments of Spanish, a language unfamiliar to the islanders. That man was José Salvador Alvarenga, and the story he carried with him would become one of the most extraordinary survival sagas ever documented in modern history. More than 14 months earlier, on November 17, 2012, Alvarenga had set sail from the port of Chiapas, Mexico, alongside his young crewmate, Ezequiel Cordoba, just 23 years old, for what was meant to be a routine fishing trip. As a seasoned fisherman, Alvarenga was no stranger to the sea's fury, but this journey would prove to be unlike anything he had faced before. Their boat was soon caught in a storm of high winds and violent waves, blown off course and out of contact. From that moment on, the two men were adrift, lost in the endless expanse of the Pacific. The first days passed in confusion. They survived on the few provisions they had brought along, but as their food and fresh water dwindled, the ocean became a slow and brutal torment. Alvarenga resorted to catching fish with his bare hands, scooping up sea turtles, hunting birds, and even drinking their blood to stay alive. He swallowed jellyfish raw, scavenged floating whale carcasses, and used plastic bottles to collect rainwater. But Cordoba, who had never faced such an ordeal, began to break down. The lack of nutrition, dehydration, and psychological strain overwhelmed him. Within just a few weeks, the young man passed away. For 6 days after Cordoba's death, Alvarenga, paralyzed by grief and haunted by isolation, continued speaking to his friend's lifeless body as if he were still alive. Only when clarity slowly returned did he silently release the body to the sea. What followed were 438 days of drifting through physical collapse and mental warfare. Alvarenga sang hymns, recalled the names of his loved ones, and stared toward the horizon as though someone might be waiting for him on the other side of it. He saw ships pass. None of them saw him. And then, one morning, when it seemed all hope had finally evaporated, he saw the color of the horizon begin to change. Low mountains flickered in the distance. With the last of his strength, he leapt from the boat that had become his world for over a year and swam toward land. He collapsed onto the sand like a man returning from the void. The global media quickly turned its spotlight on this miraculous survivor. But behind the applause and camera flashes came a flood of doubt. Could a man really endure over a year at sea and still remain coherent? Journalists, physicians, and oceanographers began combing through every detail of his account. Yet each piece of evidence, each calculation, seemed to lead back to the same conclusion. Alvarenga's story held up. Ocean current data, drift simulations, even polygraph tests, all pointed toward one undeniable truth. Some speculated that minor details may have been misremembered or embellished, but none of that could erase the central fact. He had survived. Today, José Salvador Alvarenga lives in seclusion in El Salvador, far from the sea and far from the cameras. He no longer wishes to retell his story. But deep in his eyes, there remains something unspoken, a quiet belief in the will to live. and the memories of a man who passed through hell and returned. In the summer of 1940, on a remote island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, a British expedition stumbled upon a scattering of human bones along a desolate stretch of beach. Nearby, corroded fragments of nautical equipment hinted at a maritime mishap, perhaps a shipwreck, or one of the many navigational failures common in these treacherous waters. For decades, the discovery was dismissed as unremarkable. But as forensic science advanced, the secret that time had tried to bury was slowly unearthed. Those bones, once forgotten, would become a critical clue in one of the greatest mysteries of the 20th century: the disappearance of legendary aviator Amelia Earhart. Amelia and her navigator, Fred Noonan, vanished in 1937 during their ambitious attempt to fly around the globe. Their final leg began in Papua New Guinea, aimed at a small island outpost in the vast emptiness of the Pacific. But somewhere between sea and sky, in the middle of nowhere, Amelia's voice suddenly cut off from radio transmissions. And just like that, she was gone without a trace. A massive search effort followed. Thousands of personnel, 65 aircraft, and 10 naval vessels scoured the Pacific, but every lead ended in silence. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan disappeared into history, leaving behind nothing but theories, none of which could be proven. Near the site where the bones were found, researchers uncovered a set of peculiar clues: a fragment of a woman's shoe, a sextant box matching the model Fred was known to use, and a bottle of Benedictine, a French herbal liqueur commonly brought aboard long-distance flights at the time. In a detailed study, anthropologist Richard Jantz used modern forensic techniques to compare the skeletal fragments to Amelia's known body measurements. The results were striking. Ekilens venkilens shazalekos megagiezes, elegahos, hogi megiozoen elutasitsak askorabi kovetkestetest, miserint amaradvanyok ismeretlen emberehes tartoznak. Even more compelling, in the days following her disappearance, amateur radio operators around the world reported picking up faint distress signals, echoes of someone still trying to call out from a deserted island. So, could it be that Amelia Earhart didn't die in the crash, but survived? Could she have spent her final days among the coconut trees and coral reefs, hidden from the world? The bones in the sand are still there, and they speak of a story the world was never meant to forget. Amid the vast waters of the Indian Ocean east of Madagascar lies a small and nearly forgotten chain of islands. Known as the Scattered Islands, this dry and desolate place, almost entirely devoid of fresh water, became the silent stage for a haunting tale of survival, one long buried beneath the dust of historical neglect. On a May day in 1761, the French ship L'Utile sailed into the waters near Truma. Aboard were 140 French sailors and 160 Malagasy captives, men and women who had been illegally taken from Madagascar, locked away below deck to be sold into slavery. But fate intervened. The ship struck a reef and the unforgiving sea tore through its hull. Nearly 100 Malagasy, still trapped in the hold, drowned where they lay. The entire French crew survived, along with roughly 60 of the enslaved. Once ashore, the surviving French sailors dug a well, salvaged tools from the wreckage, and began hunting seabirds and turtles to survive. In the chaos that followed, two separate camps emerged, one for the sailors and another for the surviving Malagasy. Using the remains of L'Utile, the sailors constructed a smaller vessel, which they named Providence. Then, the French departed, leaving behind the 60 Malagasy with a solemn vow they would return. But when Providence reached port, that promise was forgotten. Time passed. 1 year, then 2, then 12. Several expeditions attempted to return to Truma, but the dense coral reefs and violent seas always forced them back. During one such attempt, a sailor became stranded on the island. It's said he built a small raft, and along with a few Malagasy survivors, tried to escape, but he was never seen again. It wasn't until 1776, 15 years after the wreck, that a ship finally breached Truma's natural defenses. What they found was staggering. Only 7 women and 1 infant remained alive. Over the course of those 15 years, they had built a shelter out of coral rock and had fought for survival against the brutal elements with nothing but their resilience and one another. These final survivors were brought to the island of Mayotte, where the French governor granted them their freedom. Today, Truma is still little more than a faint dot on the map. But for those who know this story, it is far more than a forgotten island. It is a monument to the endurance of the human spirit, a quiet testament to the cost of being forgotten, and a promise that was never kept. In the long history of expeditions to the ends of the earth, there are countless tales of sacrifice, courage, and the slow unraveling of impossible dreams. But among the hundreds of names etched onto maps and remembered in history books, there is one that stands alone: Ada Blackjack, the only woman to survive on a forgotten Arctic island in a journey she was never meant to take part in. In 1921, Ada was just 23 years old. She was an Inupiat woman from Alaska, desperately trying to earn money to treat her young son's tuberculosis. It was out of necessity, not ambition, that she accepted an offer to join a strange expedition to Wrangel Island, a frozen stretch of land north of Siberia where few could survive for long. She was hired as a seamstress and cook, earning $50 a month. It was a small amount, but for Ada, it meant everything. The expedition was organized by Vilhjalmur Stefansson, a famous but controversial Arctic explorer. Stefansson believed the Arctic was not nearly as dangerous as people claimed. In fact, he called it a friendly place. Though he would not go himself, he sent 4 young, inexperienced men, along with Ada and a cat named Victoria, to a land with no people, no resupply, and almost no way back. They carried only 6 months' worth of food, and a naive faith that nature would provide the rest. At first, Wrangel Island greeted them with clear skies and herds of caribou wandering the snowy plains. But as winter approached, everything changed. Food supplies began to dwindle, temperatures dropped below what the human body could endure, and the relief ship never arrived, trapped by the ice. By early 1923, the group had descended into desperation. One of the men, Lawrence Knight, fell ill with scurvy. The 3 remaining men made the difficult decision to cross the drifting ice in search of help, but they never returned. Ada was left behind, alone on a desolate island in the middle of the Arctic winter, with a dying man and a cat. For 6 long months, she cared for Knight, doing everything she could to keep his fragile life from slipping away. But on June 23, 1923, he took his final breath. In her clumsy, handwritten English, she recorded it in her journal. He died. I don't know what time. Written by Mrs. Ada B. Jack. But Ada did not collapse. In fact, it was from that moment on that she began to become a part of the land itself. She hunted Arctic foxes, shot seabirds, and even attempted to build a skin boat to escape. She reinforced her shelter with animal hides, set traps, and kept a gun by her side in case of polar bears. On August 20th, 1923, after nearly 2 years in isolation, Ada was found. Rescuers were stunned to discover that not only had she survived, but she had also stockpiled enough food to last several more months if needed. But when she returned to civilization, Ada was not welcomed as a hero. The press sensationalized her story. Stefansson commercialized the expedition for profit, and Ada, the one who had actually endured it all, received almost nothing in return. She went home to be with her son, but life remained a series of quiet hardships. In 1983, Ada Blackjack died at the age of 85. Her grave now lies beside her son Bennett's. On a September day in 1819, beneath a curtain of thick fog and the razor-sharp winds near the Antarctic Circle, the Spanish warship San Telmo battled its way through the brutal southern seas. A massive vessel armed with 74 cannons, San Telmo was once a symbol of pride for the Spanish Navy. It was now on a strategic mission across the Atlantic to reinforce Spain's control over its South American colonies. Alongside San Telmo was a small fleet, known collectively as the South Sea Squadron. They had departed the port of Cadiz with fanfare and national pride. But from the moment they crossed the equator, fate began to splinter. One companion vessel, Alejandra, was forced to turn back due to severe damage. And then, as the remaining ships neared the infamous waters of Cape Horn, renowned for storms and hidden reefs, the inevitable struck. A violent storm descended without warning. San Telmo was torn from formation and cast adrift, pushed farther south, beyond the sight of the other ships. On September 2nd, 1819, it was seen for the last time before vanishing entirely. With 644 souls aboard, officers, sailors, Marines, the loss of San Telmo was not only a military tragedy, it was one of the most devastating naval disasters of its time. By 1822, Spain officially declared the entire crew lost. But the story didn't end there. Years later, during a British naval expedition to the frozen reaches of the South Shetland Islands, officers stumbled upon something strange. On the shores of Half Moon Beach on Livingston Island, they discovered broken planks of wood, torn canvas, and rusted metal, none of which matched any known British vessel. But even more puzzling were the signs of human presence, the charred remains of old campfires, makeshift windbreaks, and remnants of a group that had once lived there. From these scattered fragments, a new possibility emerged. San Telmo may not have sunk completely. It may have drifted all the way to this remote island. And if even a handful of its crew survived the wreck, they may have been the first people in recorded history to set foot on Antarctica. If true, it would reshape maritime history. Spain, long overshadowed by the colonial powers that followed, might reclaim a forgotten piece of its legacy. Some historians, however, look even further back. Ancient Polynesian oral traditions speak of journeys far south, across endless oceans, to lands of ice and eternal night, what they called the White Lands without sun. If these tales hold truth, then it was not the Spanish nor the British, but the Polynesians who first crossed the limits of human reach and touched the southern continent. Others point to John Davis, an English sealer, whose ship's logbook suggests he landed on the Antarctic mainland in 1820. But what if, one day, someone uncovers undeniable evidence that Spanish soldiers survived on Livingston Island? What if the first human footsteps on the last untouched continent were not part of history at all, but part of something long forgotten? Whether adrift in the vastness of the ocean, lost among the eternal snows, or stranded on forgotten islands, each person in today's stories faced the impossible and survived. These accounts may be decades, even centuries old, but they remind us that sometimes the most extraordinary acts come from the most ordinary people. If these stories gave you something to think about, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you'd like to continue exploring strange journeys and unresolved mysteries, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next.